Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. You're watching Daily Debrief. I'm Siddhantani, and on the show today we have not great news coming out of Europe as well as Yemen. And we talk about the BJP-led Narendra Modi government celebrating 8 years of rule in India. First up, the European Union will block most Russian oil imports by the end of 2022. News broke late Monday evening as members of the European Council hustled to find consensus on the issue. Eventually, an EU-wide ban on imports was announced that applies to seaborne deliveries, accounting for nearly two-thirds of Russia's oil supplies to Europe. Pipeline deliveries, for now, will not be banned. This happened as a concession to Hungary. But Poland and Germany have also pledged to end those imports. This is part of a sixth package of EU sanctions on Russia. Gas, notably, has been left out of the package. People's Dispatch's Abdul Rahman is with me in studio today to discuss how these issues have been developing. Abdul, Russia currently supplies upwards of 25% of Europe's oil and about 40% of its gas. So how do you actually see this ban playing out?
As far as I understand, and I think it is quite clear by now, the kind of inflation most of the European countries are facing, and in fact the entire world is facing because of that, I think this is going to affect the Europeans the most. Of course, Russia will have some problem, but Russia will also is basically looking for alternative market like in China and India and other countries which are willing to buy because energy prices are going up, and Russian oil, because there is you can say some countries who are not willing to buy, Russia is ready to sell the oil on concession. So these countries will benefit. But as far as Europe is concerned, I think it is going to kind of be difficult for them to kind of face it. For example, Germany is already having around 10% double-digit inflation.
Right.
Spain also has similar conditions.
Yeah.
Prices
UK as well.
UK as well, exactly. The prices of basic food commodities are now getting affected because of it. Though countries like Hungary and Slovakia and Czech Republic have been exempted for the time being, whenever they have to shift it, because there is an ultimatum that after the end of the year or maybe after, sometimes later, they will have to comply with it. These countries will, particularly the Eastern Europe, will suffer the most, which are relatively poorer, more dependent on Russian oil, also dependent on Russia for various other commodities which are essential for these economies. So these sanctions will ultimately be of course affecting Russia also, but mostly I think is a self-goal.
Yeah. We were hearing President Putin of Russia say that they are willing to help out with the global food crisis that's emerging if some of these sanctions were eased. Instead, we've received the absolute opposite response.
Yeah.
What else does this sixth package of sanctions contain? And doesn't this kind of policy to sue for peace through kind of trying to starve Russia portend to kind of just extend that conflict never-endingly?
Exactly. That strengthens the idea that this is a proxy war. Europe, in this particular sixth round of sanctions, though there are many other rounds which have been, you can say, countries individually announcing some sanctions, additional sanctions. So, but by and large, from the EU side, this is the sixth round of sanctions, which includes ban on Russian broadcasters, 3 more broadcasters, keeping the largest Russian bank out of SWIFT system, and other related sanctions. Basically, if you see this, as I said before, this is a kind of a proxy war, because this round of decisions also includes funding Ukrainian government. $10 billion, around $10 billion have been sanctioned to fund the salaries, to fund the day-to-day running of the Ukrainian government. It means that in the war between Russia and Ukraine, the European side is basically standing with Ukraine and expecting from the Russia to kind of have some moral consideration here and there. This is not how peace is achieved. If the European Union is looking for peace, as Putin statement you quoted, they have to first lift the sanctions and they have to negotiate. If you see, none of these statements which are coming in the context of the war in Ukraine are talking about talks, the necessity of talk.
Yeah.
The first thing for peace is talks. And I think Europe should realize that if they really want peace, if they want Russia to kind of stop its aggression inside Ukraine, they have to address the basic concerns. And until they address that, these sanctions will add into the conflict, will not address it.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Abdul. I'll ask you to stick around because we're talking about Yemen next, and you have updates on that story as well. Talks held under the watch of the UN Special Envoy for Yemen have not led to any clearer idea of an end to hostilities or even an extension of the truce that's been in place since the start of the month of Ramzan on the 2nd of April this year. The truce runs out on June 2nd, but there has been no consensus on its extension. Both sides are pointing fingers in opposite directions, with the government in Aden claiming a key sticking point is the Houthi reluctance to end the siege of Taiz city. So first up, Abdul, tell us a bit about this siege. Why is it so critical in the Houthi strategy and the blockades as well?
Well, Taiz is the third largest city in Yemen after Sana'a and Aden. And it is also basically a city which one of the largest provinces in Yemen. It is near to the port, Hudaydah port, and therefore it is a crucial strategic location. Yeah. So since 2015, there Houthis have surrounded the city by and large, except for the southern part, which is still open. And the city has been divided into two, you can say virtually divided into two. The lesser populated regions, industrial areas and all are under the control of the Houthis. The more populated regions are under the control of the Saudi-backed government.
Right.
So both the governments have been trying to, all these years, have been trying to kind of extend their control and have a greater say on the decision making in the region, but there is a stalemate. At this moment. So the lifting of the siege has been a wider concern. UN has also raised the issue. Houthis also have admitted that this has led to suffering and all, but they are not willing to open the roads, the crucial roads they control at this moment, for the reasons that it may lead to a complete kind of break of the balance in the war. Right. And therefore they have said that they need greater assurances in order to open those ways for the people in Taiz. This had led to humanitarian problem in the city. As I said before, this is one of the densely populated region in Yemen, and therefore it creates humanitarian situation. But Houthis argue that they are not in a position to give any concession at this moment, primarily because of the Saudi-backed coalition has refused to take significant steps which kind of addresses the basic concerns of the Houthis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we heard reports coming in from Hudaydah itself of at least 5 people killed in landmine blasts yesterday. With sort of the truce is ending on June 2nd in a couple of days from now, what lies ahead for the people of Yemen?
Apart from this, the disagreements over the Taiz thing, rest of the things, despite the fact that there have been claims of violations of ceasefire by the Saudi-backed coalition, Houthis have claimed that hundreds of aggressions have taken place in last 2 months. They are willing to kind of extend the ceasefire. The statement by the leader of the Houthi government on Sunday says that we are ready to extend it, there is no problem with it, but it cannot be extended on the cost of the suffering of the Yemeni people. It simply means that they want greater assurances. For example, when it came to the lifting of the blockade, as you said, Hudaydah, there is already fighting, small, what we call the small bits of fighting here and there going on. Apart from that, the Saudi-led coalition have also blocked various ships from reaching to the port. They also delayed deliberately the reopening of the Sana'a International Airport. Houthis are saying that in 2 months, at least 21 flights should have operated from the Sana'a International Airport. So far, only 5 pairs of flights have taken off. So this basically they're saying that we need to be compensated for all these violations, then only the truce will be extended. If you ask me, I think even the Saudi-backed government is willing to extend the truce. But both the sides are looking for kind of, you can say, some way out, because they have to sell it to their constituency as well, that what is the reason they are extending it. And that is a very crucial step. If the violations continue, if, for example, the TAS does not, there is no resolution, at least a working resolution on TAS, it will be difficult to sell the extension of the truce. And that's why TAS becomes the crucial issue at this moment.
In all of this, all right. And clearly the deadline is fast approaching to come to some kind of consensus on the subject. So we'll get back to you, Abdul, as that happens. Thanks very much for today. Good to have you back in studio. We're moving on to our final story now. The Bharatiya Janata Party under Narendra Modi has completed 8 years in power in India. The government is celebrating the event, even as the country faces an economic crisis characterized by inflation, joblessness, and state-endorsed religious polarization. The BJP has achieved great electoral success over the past 8 years and has been able to take forward its Hindu nationalist agenda. However, several observers have flagged the deep divisions that have emerged in society and a culture and politics of majoritarianism. We're going to use our magical chair now to bring Pragya in to talk more on this subject. Pragya, good to have you in the studio today talking about 8 years of the Narendra Modi government. The government, of course, celebrating and focusing on the beneficiaries of its welfare programs. But what is the wider economic situation in which all of this is happening in India?
Yes, Siddhant. So you have to measure the success or failure of any government around the expectations that it sparked. So this government came to power in 2014 on the promise of lower inflation, a booming economy, an end to corruption and crony capitalism, etc. So it is a hyper-nationalist Hindutva government. So it has actually pursued that agenda, whereas the agenda which the people had, a large section of people had banked on, the end to corruption and inflation and unemployment, none of these things it has actually been able to deliver on. So the primary reason why this has happened in the way it has unfolded is that there is a personality-centric model that the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, has followed over the last 8 years. You find that there are whims of the government which are pursued more than it is actually pursuing a clear economic agenda. In the last 8 years, you do not get the sense that there is a clear economic vision. And if in 8 years you don't have a sense of a vision, it means that the vision is not there. I can give you a few examples of this. The government has consistently derided a scheme called the NREGA, which provides rural poor employment of 100 days. Now, this scheme is supposed to tide over a very difficult period for the poor. It derides the scheme, but it funds it. It funds it inadequately, but it funds it. So there's a contradiction there. Similarly, the government said that they will have a bankruptcy code to deal with bad assets. But at the same time, in the previous budget, the finance minister announced a scheme for a bad bank. So you cannot have both. So the personality-centric model actually showed reared its head in 2016 when suddenly overnight the currency of denomination 1,500 were withdrawn. This step actually was a sort of self-inflicted wound, and the economy never really recovered from that. It crushed the people who were self-employed. It crushed the people who were working in the smaller firms, which is 80% of India's employment. Even as we speak, we find that the economic growth estimates are being overturned, being lowered and lowered and lowered, and that's because the claims of the government that it is feeding into the economic prosperity are just contradicted by the numbers. We can take another example of the biggest mass migration on foot took place during the COVID pandemic in India. Right now, we don't yet know how many people died during that mass migration, but it was the biggest such migration which took place after India's partition. So we find that the government is making certain claims, but it's not able to live up to them. Let's look at the current situation. The previous government, before 2014, had 3 years of oil prices internationally over $100 a barrel. Right. Now, when the prices are roughly around there, for just a few months, we find that the inflation is sky high, the people have not been protected from the higher prices of fuel, and so the inflation is, we're back to 2014 in a sense. So the claims and the reality in the economic sphere have consistently, in the policy sphere, there's been too much flip-flop. It's impossible to really gauge what the government is trying to get at.
What is perhaps beyond debate, Pragya, is the growing sort of social divisions in the country and the rampant sort of majoritarianism that we're seeing, and we're seeing it increasingly in news coverage as well as experiencing it on the ground. What has the Modi-led government done to address this, or is it part of the entire sort of political gambit?
Yes, this is the hyper-nationalistic part where you could say that the BJP has actually harnessed it very effectively for its own advantage. It has won election after election. It is now either the ruling party in states, of course nationally it is, in various provinces it is either the ruling party or very often the principal opposition party. This is something that the BJP has harnessed in order to foster social divides. Now, the BJP is an offshoot of the RSS, which we know as the Sangh, whose policy or whose agenda, it's well known, their agenda is to have Hindu aggression displayed and projected against the minorities, especially the Muslims. So there is a lot of resentment which is fostered among the majority population, the Hindus, towards the 15% of the Muslim population. So you had one Muslim majority state which has now been downgraded to a union territory. Jammu and Kashmir, their autonomous status was withdrawn in 2019, which again created a lot of conflict on the ground. You have supporters of the BJP government who actually go around on the streets shouting slogans. There have been people who have been beaten up, killed because of false allegations very often that they were eating beef, which some Hindus regard as sacred. So there has been overall great boiling resentment which has been created. Most of this has been done through the device of the media. In India, historically, no government will be criticized, no government will change unless the media plays a role of informing people. That role has not been played by the media. So you have Hindutva forces, you have the Sangh forces, many of them supported by the BJP, who are essentially sowing divisions along religious lines and sowing divisions along caste lines. So those, for example, you see the BJP supporters supporting their governments for bulldozing the homes of the poor. This is absolutely unprecedented things. And people might wonder, why then does the BJP get elected? It's again because of the role of the media. They are not informing people. So how are people supposed to choose?
And I guess consequently also the rise in new media and the access that people in India suddenly have to mobile internet technology has also played a massive role in all of this propagation. We'll perhaps talk more on this subsequently. Pragya, thanks for the update for now. That's all we have on this episode of Daily Debrief. From Pragya, myself and the entire People's Dispatch team, thanks very much for watching. For more details on all of these stories, you can head on over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, stay safe.